Hi, I'm David Harmon, and this is my partner Keith Cook. We are real estate brokers with RE/MAX in Bellingham, Washington.
On our website, a lot of people were searching real estate terms, so this video specifically, this series will be for real estate glossary or lingo or terms that realtors or brokers are using in real estate. So hopefully you like it. We are brokers. The end result is what we're hoping for is that people like what we have to say. They want to list their property for sale or help them find a property to buy. So check it out, like, subscribe, and hope you enjoy. If you are a buyer and want to purchase a property, you do not need to come up with 100% of the purchase price. So what you would do is speak with a loan officer and see what your qualifications are as far as they're going to look at your income and your expenses, and then they're going to figure out what your debt is, and they will figure out based on your income what type of a loan amount you may qualify for and what type of loan terms you might look for. So if you wanted to say, I want a payment of X per month at this interest rate, if you qualify for it and that's what your comfort level is, they said, all right, that payment calculates to so much of a home. And there's different types of loan down payments. So you can go anywhere from 0 to 25% down. So you don't need a bunch of money to buy a home, and that's the beauty of the loan is that, say you put 5% down on a $700,000 house. So you put $35,000 down, the bank lends you the other $665,000, and you make monthly payments on that. So there's gonna be different terms associated with how are you borrowing the money and how does that fit through the process. Watch this little loan segment. We'll try to get into at least what it is for buying and selling and how a loan helps play a key role in the purchase of real estate.
Investment property. Unimproved property held as an investment in the expectation that it will appreciate in value.
That's an interesting definition because they're saying unimproved, and I don't know if I would really call that investment property. So it's more of like a land bank, and I think people will put money into a land bank, but in my mind, with this definition, that's definitely a luxury. So raw land that you're not developing, in my mind, would be a luxury, and unless it's just super affordable. But let's just say you had $1 million development piece and you're going to put money into it. Eventually you may get a big payday, but had you put that same $1 million into income producing property, you would have had tenants there paying the rent and you would have had the income. So let's just say you're getting $6,000 a month on your $1 million property, $60,000 a year, you own it for 10 years. Well, there's $600,000 difference what you made just in rental income. Right. So interesting definition.
Yeah, I think investment property now, especially nowadays, we have a lot of new terms whenever this was written, because we have a lot of flippers. I would consider them investment people. They're just buying actual houses and trying to put a little money into it and then get some money back out. So
I think all forms of real estate are really an investment, because you could either take the money and go buy something fun or a car or a vacation or something, but I think it's really planning for the future. And even with your own primary residence, which we've run into before, where it just takes a little bit of work, and you do that little bit of work at the time to buy the house, to get qualified, go out and purchase a home. It's a pain in the neck, but it is a process. The benefit you have for owning the home is eventually there's not a mortgage payment on that anymore. So it really is an investment, but it's probably, in my opinion, the number one investment someone can make whatsoever in their lifetime, because we've seen it before. We were just at a property where the tenant had been there 20 years. Had the tenant tried earlier to stay there or obtain a loan, they would have a house free and clear right now and not be obligated to continue to pay rent for the rest of their lives. So we can get you there. The word of the day is on this investment property is just buy some, buy anything. Judgment, a court's binding determination of the rights and duties of the parties in a lawsuit. The second one being a court order requiring one party to pay the other damages. And I think where we run into this sometimes in real estate will be on a title report, or has somewhat to do with the proceeds on what a seller may get. Because if you're selling a property and there's a judgment, a lot of times that might be recorded against the property. So you could have a judgment that came up from years before, and guess what? You're going to pay the piper once you sell the property and we clear the title, because that would have been recorded against the property, and in order to clear and perfect clear title to a new buyer, that judgment needs to be paid. So kind of sucks for the seller a little bit, but the buyer, you know, you're going to get a property without encumbrances. Kickback, a fee paid for referral, for example, to an appraiser or inspector. The Real Estate Settlement Procedure Act prohibits kickbacks to settlement service providers in most residential mortgage loan transactions. That sounded like such a good word, kickback, because it sounds good, doesn't it? But I guess maybe not so much. They've really cut down, even with escrow and title companies. I wouldn't say it was a kickback, but with the insurance commissioner, they really regulate how brokers work with others. So yeah, we can't do kickbacks. We can't even with the title or escrow company. If we're to even get a Sharpie or a highlight pin, they have, there's only so many of those we can get per year. Where back in the day, they used to somewhat wine us and dine us, and we had a lot more fun, but they caught on to that. And so I guess when this definition was made up, that was more of a thing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely better for the consumer and the client. That makes it more a bit of an even playing field. So there's no, I guess, manipulation on the backside of, I guess, maybe shady activity where either, you know, an appraiser or lender or whatever is, you know, motivated by something other than doing the right thing.
Right. Yeah, they'll make it happen if they get so much money in return.
Right.
There is something, and this may coincide with a little bit on a referral fee, or how referrals work. How that is, if we're working with a client that may be looking in, say, Arizona, which just happens a lot. So we may find a location of where we know someone's moving to Arizona, actually call another broker, and that broker is willing to share part of their fee with us as licensed brokers if they help them find a property down there, and vice versa. If there's an Arizona broker that has someone coming up here, we'll help them participate, because in a little way they are actually helping, or we are helping with those types of transactions too. So a few different ways in there for referrals or kickbacks.
Land. In the legal sense, it is a solid part of the surface of the earth, everything affixed to it by nature or by man, or anything on it or in it, such as minerals and waters, real property.
That's our definition, land, in case you guys want to own real estate. We do sell land, so I think of land is probably like over an acre is when I think it. Everyone has a little plot of parcel, but when we're actually doing acreage or land, it's a larger piece. So they have them anywhere from, by square footage, an acre of land is 43,560 square feet. And we'll see some parcels as little as 3,000 or 4,000 square feet up to, you know, huge amounts of acres that are hundreds of thousands of square feet. So it's what we're on now. Are we flat? Is it flat land, or
yeah, it can be just about anything.
Or are we circular? I don't know. There's a whole debate on this, and we're not here to get into that. But
yeah. But I think, I mean, really, when you think about it, the history of, you know, our nation is the desire to actually own land.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what, you know, people came here for. So it's just it's kind of a piece of our history, but something people strive for is to actually own something that's attached to the earth, I guess, according to this definition. Landlocked property, a parcel of land without access to a road or a highway. Definitely not something you probably want to own.
No.
How do you get there?
And then I was just drawing this little map as what you go, but here's the road, and here's your property, and your property doesn't touch the road. Now, you don't necessarily have to have, on owning real estate, you don't have to have ownership all the way to the road. Sometimes you could be a mile off the road, a variety of properties, and what there is an easement to connect you all the way to the county road. In this case for landlocked, you have property that, however it was divided, did not include access to the road, whether either like on a pipe stem where you might own one of these little long skinny pieces that, 20, 30 feet that connects all the way to the road, or an easement. So you might have one 30-foot little stretch and 20 people all get the right to use it, and ingress, egress, utilities, easements that way. And there are, landlocks is a thing. I've got properties right now that we can't sell because they're going through and trying to figure this, getting access to the property.
So what's the solution if you have landlocked? Can you negotiate with other owners around you, or how do you solve the problem?
It depends. So it definitely decreases the value of the property, because the most of the value would be what's it worth on the open public, and what's the value to the open public. In this case, if you have a limited buyer, it's the buyers really, as a neighbor, determine what the price may be for the property. So I would always start with the neighbor, because I think it's like monopoly a little bit. Some people start with one property and they want to kind of build from there. But some neighbors, either the adjacent property will be worth the most to them or the least to them. It just depends on that situation for that neighbor. The one we're working on with right now, sometimes there's contested easements, or they go through and you have to establish the right that you have been using it, whether a prescriptive easement or. So it's I can't really say I've been involved in too many, but I've got one right now that we're not putting on the market because they've been dealing with this for years. So the lesson today for landlocked property is, don't buy it unless you really know what you're doing.
Landlord, a landowner who has leased his property to another, also called the lessor.
And we would love to help you become the landlord, because you can be the landlord or the tenant or the lessor or the lessee. So it just, I guess the landlord must become a European term or something. If you're the lord of the land. I don't know if we really have any lords around here, but.
Yeah, we see it lots of times in different situations where people don't really want to be landlords, but say you're a buyer and you buy a house and the seller stays in the house after closing, then automatically after closing, the buyer becomes the landlord of the person that just sold it. So it usually needs to be some type of drawn up agreement stating that you are the landlord. And so there's a situation where maybe you didn't really want to be a landlord, but you're kind of in it by default situation.
Right, and that it happens, and it's kind of logical to me, because in a traditional sale, someone's going to buy the house, and then the sellers, to have them expect to be all the way out the day of closing and move and have a replacement property. Well, where did all this money come from to help them move, or if the buyer changes their mind? So, and in negotiation, if there's multiple people interested in purchasing the same property, trying to make it as easy as possible for an owner, which may be, we'll close on the property, and then we'll be the landlord for 2 weeks while you go get the heck out of our house we just bought, and then move on. But technically, that buyer was a landlord for a couple weeks, so you can put that on your resume that you were a landlord on your own house.
Latent defects, defects that are not visible or apparent, unless maybe you're Superman and you can see through the walls of a house.
Well, kind of those inspectors can with those infrared things, so they can see if there's heat loss or water or even live wires. If there are latent defects, hopefully they're disclosed on a disclosure. We would say something like, if there is a hole in the floor and you put, it's a burn mark or something, defect, and you put something to cover it, you should tell people. So if you put a throw rug on there, on your disclosure, you should say when this gets pulled up, you'll see that it's visible. But a lot of times when someone moves into a house, it's not necessarily as clean as what they thought, because people take the art off the walls and there's nails and they move stuff up. It could even be something with hardwood floors. I wouldn't say it's a latent defect, but if you have a hardwood floor and a runner, a carpet runner, when you move out and take that carpet with you, a lot of times the wood may discolor differently if it's exposed to sun or not. So
yeah, there's definitely some issues. I mean, your home inspector is going to go through and do the quality job that they do, but they are going to be upfront about the fact too that they can only find what they can discover, even with their infrared machines or whatever. They can't always see what the slab is like underneath the carpet. Obviously, we're not going to go into a house and start ripping up the carpet to see what things are like under the floors, because the seller wouldn't obviously want that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of things in a house that are undiscoverable at the time of a home inspection. But yeah, definitely, if you're the seller, you need to disclose that, because it can definitely come back and haunt you later on if you don't disclose something that you know of as being a latent defect. So yeah, both sides, buyer beware.
With latent defect, I think the best workaround from a buyer standpoint is to actually get the home inspection, because latent defects, things you may be able to see or not, but most buyers aren't going into the crawl space or the attic or on the roof or really even know what to look for. So hiring a home inspector to look at the property, evaluate it, will at least identify what some of the latent defects are, because most houses are going to have some type of a defect or something that you could fix or repair. So hiring a home inspection should identify them, and then that'll give you kind of a punch list of things you could consider working on during your ownership. Latent defects.
Lease. A conveyance of a leasehold estate from the fee owner to a tenant. A contract in which one party pays the other rent in exchange for possession of real estate. Also called a rental agreement.
Yeah, and if you don't own the property, then you're leasing it. Somehow you have an arrangement to take possession of that property, either on a monthly or annual basis, and it can be residential or commercial. It can be land. There's some leases where you may have a leasehold interest in a property, so like mobile home parks or something, to where you actually have a lease for your little plot of land and you bring your own manufactured home in there. So, but for the most part, I think it's just an understanding of the parties reduced to writing, so all parties know what their expectations are.
Right. I think they're kind of ambiguous terms, rent and lease, for a lot of people. There's some minute breakdowns between the two. You'll see mostly rents are going to be shorter term. Like you go month to month, that'd be more of a rent. Longer term would be a lease. Also thinking of just take it to the simple process of leasing a car. If you lease a car, you're responsible for gas, tires, maintenance, changing the oil. You're responsible for all that under a lease. If you're renting, you're not responsible for changing the oil in your rental car and checking all the fluids, et cetera, and stuff. That's done. So kind of the same when it comes to a lease with property, where you have different responsibilities as opposed to rent.
Rent, though, I'm not sure if we'll get into it later. There's different types of leases. So there's either a gross lease or like a triple net lease. So in commercial, someone may lease you the building, and if it's a triple net, then the tenant pays the property taxes in addition to the lease, the maintenance, the insurance, all the fees associated with owning that property. And usually those are like longer 5, 10, 20-year leases. If it's a gross lease, then the tenant is just paying their rent, and they don't have to pay the taxes or insurance. They may pay a proration on some utilities if they're sharing it with other people, but there are different types of leases, just like leasing a house versus leasing one unit in a fourplex. Like, who takes care of the yard? So if you are in the fourplex, is there a little common area? What do you have? So we deal with them all the time, because mostly with property owners or with property managers, because a lot of our customers have properties that they lease out. So it's a good way to, I guess, work your wealth up. Is if you have a property and you're sitting there and you're not using it, if you lease it, that will generate monthly income, and it's pretty sizable right now. I mean, a couple grand doesn't get you much in Bellingham, so 25 grand a year just for having a house. So it's a pretty good job, really.
Yeah, so that's kind of the quick shot of what leases are. Legal description. A precise description of a parcel of real estate may be a lot and block description, a meets and bounds description, or a government survey description.
It's probably one of the most important things, I think, that we have with our sales is making sure we're selling the actual right property. And so each property is given its own individual unique identifier that's legally described. And now the county may associate each property with a number, and that's just for tax recording purposes. And there's a cool way they map and grid as far as section, township, range, how they figure out what your parcel number is. But the legal description, is really what you have. And it's what's wild to me is the equipment we have right now versus what they used to have, 100 years ago, on how actually accurate they were quite a while ago. So the meets and bounds is funny. Instead of like reading it to I own from the big rock to the old oak tree, and then from there, and what happens when the old oak tree ain't there no more. So.
So the numbers on front of my house and the street address is not my legal description?
Not for buying or selling real estate, but maybe for something else. I don't know, but nowhere I'm aware of.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to identify a property, because you can have the address, you can have parcel numbers, multiple different ways. But really, the only true way, like on a deed or whatever, to transfer property or actually show ownership, is to actually have a form of a legal description.
Correct.
Lien release, a document removing a lien given to the borrower by the lender once a mortgage or a deed of trust has been paid off in full.
That's very similar to a reconveyance, just showing that the existing debt has been satisfied. So if you have a mortgage, you want to get one of those, because then it shows you don't owe anymore.
Yeah, the lien is it's no different than your car. When you buy a car and you have a loan on it, when you pay it off, they release the lien. So now you actually own the car. Same situation, and anything that has a lien against it, once it's paid off, they release that lien. Lien, a non-possessory interest in real property, giving the lien holder the right to foreclose if the owner doesn't pay a debt owed to the lien holder. A financial encumbrance on the owner's title.
Yeah, just looking this up, there is a lot of different types of liens. So we have construction liens, equitable liens, general liens, involuntary liens, judgment liens, material liens, mechanics liens, property tax liens, specific liens, statutory liens, tax liens, voluntary liens. That's a lot of liening going on there.
I think definitely the most common would just be your mortgage.
Right.
The bank that you borrowed the money from, or the lender that you borrowed the money from, would actually have a lien, which granting them the right to foreclose on it if you were to default.
Yeah, and that's voluntary. Yeah. So that's something that you've placed on the property, or you got a second home equity line of credit, so you wanted to borrow some money, that's still a lien on your property. Some of these other ones are kind of problematical, and so it may be worth trying to make sure and clear up. These do affect title if there are liens on your title, and when you go to sell your property, the title company is going to make sure to research each one of these liens to see if they're valid or not. But if these liens aren't addressed or cured, then you will not be able to cure or transfer title to a third party. So it's a great instrument for the people who have funds owed to them to make sure that they're secured and going to get paid back later.
And liens can affect both buyer and seller to some aspect, I guess, because the buyer goes into it. Maybe the house is listed at $100,000 and the buyer thinks they're getting a good deal, but maybe The seller has $150,000 either in some type of a lien or some type of stuff on title. So they actually owe more on the property than the buyer's willing to pay.
Right, we'll get to that one on short sale because there is a way to deal with that process to get these liens to negotiate for less money. Liens can actually be on buyers and sellers. So if you have, say, an easy one is a divorce or child support, that's a lien against an individual. That individual goes to buy a property. Title is ran on the individual purchasing as well, and they run your name. And so that would be implied to take a first position if they owed someone some additional money. So the lender will not lend to someone if they're not going to be in first position. So it's a little complicated on these liens, but liens kind of go hand in hand with title because that's the process where we just figure out if there are any liens. One more tidbit on a lien is I think the importance of working with brokers to problem solve and identify and try to negotiate, because some of these, whether if you're a buyer or a seller and you have a lien, a lot of them are potentially negotiable. A lot of them, even if they're there, have huge interest rates and will go on and on too. So they're a bit of a pain in the neck, but I think that's the importance of working with a broker or people who help you come and massage and work with your title or lien issues.
So there you go, quick little snapshot on what liens are. Life estate, a freehold estate that lasts only as long as the specified person lives. That person is referred to as the measuring life.
We don't run into this one that often. It is kind of I would say traditionally more of a family way to deal with a property, or like I'm gonna have a property and then want to give it to my son, and then that really transfers to him when I pass away. So it's a way for him to take ownership. Right now, he gets the ownership of the property, but it's almost like I have a lease on the property until I pass away. The favorite one I ran into was with some developers in Renton, and they ended up buying a property, and I was working with this gal who was in her 80s, and she brought me home to meet Mom. Mom was over 100, and Mom had sold this property 20 some odd years before in her 80s, and to these group of investors. We all think of developers or whatever, but so she outlived it. They're thinking in the 80s maybe we're going to get this property fairly soon, but it was over 20 years later. She kept on going. So I think it can be a benefit in this aspect. If it keeps you living longer, then I think we should all do life estates if that keeps us going longer.
Lis Pendens, a recorded notice stating that there is a lawsuit pending that may affect title to the defendant's real estate.
The Lis Pendens comes in handy mostly if you're a buyer and disgruntled, or a party and are disgruntled with a piece of property. And so you would go and make notice that you're frustrated with that property. It puts a Lis Pendens on that, which will kind of be treated as like not exactly a lien, but like a pre-lien, and that will make sure that the title company will want to address that. And the title company is extremely cautious. They won't just like deed property out without making sure that all of their bases are covered. They're an insurance company, so they're going to do what's right. So usually it's just a really short-term gap for taking care of a question that the parties have, as far as usually it's a financial matter. Someone thinks they're owed some money, or someone's doing something wrong with that property.
Listing brokerage, the brokerage that takes a listing and thus represents the seller.
The listing brokerage, and this is assuming that we're using our listings, is confusing as much as we get in with all these other listings. So for the most part, if we meet with someone and they want to sell their property, they're basically hiring us. But we're not the number one brokers in the office. We actually have our designated broker. And in this case, so they sign the agreement up with us. We're going to represent them under as sub-agents for RE/MAX. and that we are the listing brokers. Our intent is to represent the sellers what we would want. Unfortunately, with agency in Washington right now, it gives us the right to be a dual agent, which makes it a little bit different too. So I wouldn't exactly agree with the term where we're going to represent the seller, because the Northwest multiple agreements give the broker the right to act as a dual agent, which is, I guess, complicated. And some of what Dave and I have done is we're on different sides of sales from each other. Sometimes Dave's the listing broker and I'm the selling broker. Sometimes I'm the listing broker and Dave's the selling broker. But it really is a fine line. And even though we work well together, there's only so many brokers in town, and we've worked with a lot of them on multiple occasions. So just like us, where we will have your client's best interest and my client's best interest, it's a fun way to do the job. Where it becomes a pain in the neck, quite honestly, is the dual agency, where you're asking one broker to represent a buyer and a seller who may have one goal of getting the property, but usually if you ask the buyer, would they be happy to buy it for $100,000 less? They would say yes. And would the seller take $100,000 more? They would say yes. And it puts us in a position to where we can't say anything to one party or the other party that would fester the transaction. So we really don't get our opinions as much on these types of transactions. And that's why I think where we work so well, even before, if we're marketing a property or not, we'll kind of split, because I think we can both give better advice to parties that we're representing and really have no advice. Right. So some brokers may do that more than we do, but it is, I think it's a little riskier and a lot more work.
Yeah, I think having your due diligence in finding a listing broker, not just pulling one out of Google or the old school Yellow Pages, because the listing broker is really your guide to selling your house, and they're the one that's going to help you navigate all the way through the process. They're going to help you set the price. They're going to help you with if there's any title things that maybe you need to deal with. They're going to do all the research. So actually, vetting who you're going to be working with, whether you're interviewing several listing agents on your house, it's really an important step to a successful transaction. And having somebody that has years of experience, like Keith and I, is going to be a benefit to you. So,
no, and on that, you're just making me think. It's the importance on that is there's so much to it as far as what's the broker's availability. Are they on a team or not? Is it just one? If they go out of town, what happens with your listing? Do they have, what do they do for marketing? What do they do for follow-up? What do they do for negotiations? And sometimes, like with individuals, so Dave and I work together, the benefit is one of us is always in the office, because if not, let's just say someone calls up and they're gonna buy $1 million listing, right? Guess what? Boom, we're out. We're gone for a week trying to show them houses where they're at. Well, if we had your property listed at the same time, who's at the office taking care of the listing, calling the people back, dealing with you and your property? So with us, we like listings. We like to represent sellers and buyers, but we definitely like to take care of sellers. So if we're here and have the availability to work with you. So to me, that's important. It's also having the experience, the knowledge of how many years we've been doing it, like you said, and just, I guess, the creativity too. And each property is completely unique and completely separate from dealing with your seller, your situation, and the buyer and their situation and their broker, and put it all together and coming up with options and creative ways to really get either what's best for you or better for you, or at least let you understand where you might be getting a better side of the transaction. And maybe there's some parts of it you're willing to negotiate a little bit more, but it's helping you realize what your decisions are and give you an accurate choice for everything. So it's fun. I love working with the sellers. So a listing is when a person owns a piece of property and they decide they want to sell it. They will hire a broker to represent them and market the property and guide them through the process of selling it dealing with looking at offers and financing and contingencies, inspections, kind of guide them through the whole process. But it starts with the listing contract, and that's with the listing broker.
Listing, a written agency contract between a seller and a real estate brokerage, stipulating that the brokerage will be paid a commission for finding or attempting to find a buyer for the seller's property, also called a listing agreement. That's how we get paid.
That is, it kind of makes sense. It's just a contract with the seller to work with the broker to market and do their best effort to sell the property. And then what we do in turn, we work with two, multiple listings, which is the term. We work with the Northwest Multiple Listing Service, which is a collective of over 35,000 brokers that will input our properties up for sale and market to all these 35,000 industry professionals, so they all know that the property is for sale. It works wonders for the seller to make sure the home is exposed to as many markets as possible. The second one we use is a little less known. It's the Commercial Multiple Listing Association, and there's, I think, 3,000 to 5,000 people in there, and that's more specifically for commercial investments and leasing type properties. But it's basically the listing, and the listing is if you have an actual piece of property that you would like to sell and get rid of, versus the buyer aspect of that would be like a buyer agency or a buyer brokerage agreement saying that I'm a buyer and I want to purchase a property. So there's kind of mostly how we work is all agreement. So there's an agreement between a buyer and a seller. There's an agreement usually sometimes between a buyer and their broker and a seller and their broker. They all connect, but it's just making sure that we reduce what everyone's intentions are to writing.
Right. And the listing agreement is really just a legal document stating the terms of the listing. So whether it's commission, agency, it kind of spells out everything.
Expiration date.
Yeah.
It's got a legal description. We make sure there's no Lis Pendens. It checks it all.
Yeah. Listing agreement.
Yeah. Call us. We love listing agreements. That's our number one deal. We love listing agreements.
Littoral land that borders on a stationary body of water. Littoral rights, the water rights of an owner of littoral land in regard to the use of the water in the lake.
And then I guess we compare that to riparian land, which is land that is adjacent to or crossed by a flowing body of water, like a river or stream, compared to littoral land.
So yeah, it's kind of, that's, everybody wants to own something with some water out front so you can, when it's hot out, you can go swimming in the lake. That's one of your rights if you live on a lake or you live on a river, that you can go out and swim without having to ask.
Sure. We're fairly lucky, I would say, here in the Pacific Northwest because we have water compared to like the desert where I'm not sure how much water's out there, but so we have lots of lakes, streams, rivers. We have the saltwater front. So they all have different ownership interests and things that can happen or not. Just like if a river flows either to or away from your property, that may affect it. You can have, depending on the type of waterfront, you can have like high bank, and then you could have part of your bank go away too. So there's different types of ownership and just how it's affected. So anyways, there's a lot of opportunities for both littoral and riparian ownership in Whatcom County.
Loan estimate. In a residential transaction subject to RESPA and the Truth in Lending Act, a form that the lender must give the buyer, the loan applicant, providing detailed information about the loan and an estimate of closing costs.
Yeah, they're pretty much sticklers on making sure if you're borrowing money. So this is a lot happened after 27, 28, all of the financial stuff that went along. So some of the repercussions of that, we're making sure that lenders are a little bit more upfront on each sale. If you're going to borrow money, they have to send out a closing disclosure prior to closing. So I think there's just a lot more accountability. I think it benefits everybody. So the loan estimates are pretty important to have.
Yeah, generally you'll get those maybe a couple days before closing so that you can see what all those costs are, and you can actually dissect every little thing and understand before you actually go in to sign. It's kind of like a little resting period that allows the person taking the loan to investigate all the costs involved. Loan to value ratio, the relationship between the loan amount and either the sale price or the appraised value of the property, whichever is less, expressed as a percentage.
I think we'll see this quite a bit, either based on if a buyer's going to say what their down payment is. So a buyer may say they're going 25% down, so we'll get the appraisal and the buyer puts 25% down of that or the purchase price. Or if you're going to refinance your home, then you will find the lender will come up with a calculation how much you can borrow of the appraised value. So the loan to value is just a real quick math calculation as far as what is the equity in the home.
Loan workout, an alternative to foreclosure in which a lender agrees to a new payment plan for a loan or the reduction of the loan's interest rate or principal amount.
The loan workout usually kicks in when a borrower is in default on their mortgage. The lender does not want to go through a foreclosure process, and they just modify the loans. A lot of times it's called a loan modification. It works out pretty good. If you're late on a bunch of payments, they'll just take your back payments that you're late, wrap it into the mortgage, and a lot of times lower your interest rate and lower the payment and make it more affordable. So it was a good alternative to a foreclosure.
Yeah, once again, I think we've referenced it in the past. If there is an issue with your loan, it's always a good idea to reach out to the lender and see if you can work something out, as opposed to putting your head in the sand and just hoping that it goes away, because they want to work with you.
They are tricky. We've helped a variety of people with these in the past, so if you need a hand, reach out to us. Lot and block description. The type of legal description used for platted property. It states the property's lot number and block number and the name of the subdivision, referring to the plat map recorded in the county where the property is located, sometimes called maps and plat descriptions. There's a variety of ways to describe it. So we had the meets and bounds where you measure and see this far from this post and this far from, you get these dimensions, you go 300 feet this way, 400 feet that way. But a plat map is something that will come in, it's all divided, it's all put into each parcel gets its own lot number. So it's really easy to identify. If you're in the Buyer Max subdivision and you get lot 22, it's all identified and recorded. So it's a public notice of what your parcel is, and it's legally described.
Lot, a parcel of land, especially a parcel in a subdivision.
It's pretty simple. If you have a subdivision, you'll have a lot in it. So there could be someone takes 20 acres, divides it into 100 lots, and you're going to get one of those lots in the subdivision. That's a lot. I think that's the easy definition, but it's basically really any parcel of land that you have. I usually consider it less than an acre or so as a lot. Once you get above that, then it's more acreage, I think how people will refer to it. But I've seen 5-acre lots too. So it's the piece of property you end up purchasing is a lot. Versus a lot, which is, it could cost a lot.
Market price. What is market price? Market price is the actual true value of a property, not to be confused with market value, which is just an estimate of what a property might be worth. Market price is the actual price in which the property sold for.
And we'll see with investors a lot too, they may use the term ARV or as repaired value. So if you're going to buy a property that's a fixer-upper and want to know what that may be worth later, then that would be the as repaired value, or what your gain in equity may be after you make the repairs.
Market value. What is market value? Market value is an estimated value of what your property should sell for. That can be calculated either through a comparative market analysis, where we use different properties that are like kind to the property that you may be selling, and then we come up with that value based on what the other properties nearby or with the same features have sold for, giving you what we would consider to be your market value. Material fact, information that has a substantial negative impact on the value of a property, on a party's ability to perform, or the purpose of the transaction. Material fact actually has kind of a broad base of description, because it can mean anything from somebody not disclosing the fact that they have a contingent offer and they made an offer on the house, to something that's affecting the value of the property that's noticeable.
So, how would the contingent offer make a material fact?
Well, if somebody made an offer and they didn't disclose the fact up front that they had to sell a house first in order to buy that house, it was...
So if their house doesn't sell, I want to buy your house, but my house doesn't sell, you're in a pickle because I wasn't upfront with you.
Right.
What about material facts with the property? Are we talking mostly in contracts, or like a material, and I guess that's a material fact versus a material defect. So
Right.
that would be different from a physical characteristic with the property, but something, a material fact may be someone's getting divorced, or there's liens against the property, or something's going to happen, someone's losing their job. So there's a lot to, a lot to a transaction, but making sure that all parties know what all parties are doing is probably the best way to avoid any material facts.
Meridian, an imaginary line running north and south passing through the Earth's poles, also called the longitudinal line.
And this will come up with legal descriptions as far as how they'll do describe property. And at least in Whatcom County, we have section, township, and ranges. And so it's divided. We may get into this a little deeper later, but initially just for this definition, it's a north-south line, and there's also east-west, and how you can find property with coordinates. But it's we're lucky we actually have the guide Meridian in Whatcom County. So Meridians.
Meets and bounds description, a legal description that starts at an identifiable point of a beginning, then describes the property's boundaries in terms of course, compass directions, and distances, ultimately returning to the point of the beginning. So you go around the tree, to the old tire, down to the rock in the corner, and then to the river.
They used to do it that way sometimes. I don't think it's as common now, but we will run into some of these older properties that use a meets and bounds description. And on some of the larger pieces, it'll come up too with the definition of length of how far it is from one point to the next point, then that point to the next one. Usually we'll find this on the legal description, and a lot of times we'll find it on the title report. So it's definitely verified on purchasing, so you'll have a chance to look at your full legal description, and you may get it as a variety of ways of how they may describe the property. It might be like the subdivisional lot, it might be the meets and bounds, so there's a few different ways, but it is an interesting way to look at it. If anyone's curious, even if your property on your legal description, you could send us a message and we could pull your legal description up if you have property in Whatcom County and send that to you and tell you what type of legal description you have if you're not aware.
Mineral rights, rights to the minerals located beneath the surface of the piece of property.
In Whatcom County, we'll run into oil, coal, gas, and sometimes if you buy the land, you either have the mineral rights or you don't have the mineral rights. So not all properties, even in Bellingham, include the mineral rights. There's some up in the northwest section to where there was some old coal mines up there. So the property was sold on the surface, but people kept the property under the surface in case there was coal that they could sell that. If you have your mineral rights, then you own from basically your lot to the center of the earth unobstructed. If someone has any rights to that property below surface, then those would be their mineral rights. Kind of similar to where, like some of the TV shows where they're mining in Alaska and stuff, the people may not own the property, but they have the rights to go get the gold. So
Yeah, it can be a little bit difficult, and it's something that we can definitely help you out with. It's something you're going to find in title, whether or not the previous owners had rights to that and kept it.
And they can be transferred separately as well. So if the previous owner had them and you want to purchase them, there's a negotiation process for getting your mineral rights back too.
Yeah, so we can definitely help you out with that. So just give us a shout and we can go from there. MIP, mortgage insurance premium, especially a premium charged in connection with an FHA insured loan.
PMI is private mortgage insurance for a conventional loan with less than 20% down. MIP, mortgage insurance premium, is the same thing but with an FHA loan. So it's an insurance against foreclosure.
And yeah, kind of the difference is on the FHA loan, it doesn't always kick out once you get to that 80%, whereas on the conventional, it's supposed to kick out and you don't have to pay that insurance premium anymore. So on an FHA, it's something that depends on the actual loan, but generally it will stay, you'll still pay that insurance all the way through your loan period. So.
And there's ways to try to avoid it. People don't want to pay an insurance if you don't need it. If you have more than 20% down, you avoid the insurance. So there's some things as you gain equity, each lender is going to teach it a little bit differently, but it's either how much you've paid off or the equity in it or refinancing it. So there's ways to try to ultimately get out of having a mortgage insurance. But initially, if that's what's required to get into the house, that's what it takes. So you try to do what you can to purchase the property. Multiple listing service. What is a multiple listing service? Sometimes that term's thrown around and I don't think a lot of consumers really understand that. In Washington, there's two main multiple listing services. The Northwest Multiple Listing Service for residential brokers, which has roughly over 30,000 brokers, and the Commercial Broker Association, which has a little under 5,000 brokers. For the most part, what it is brokers are trying to work together to work with buyers and sellers. So if you're going to list a property, you would put it on the multiple listing service, and then that will broadcast it out to the other brokers to make sure if they're working with a buyer, the buyer is going to be aware of the properties that are for sale. So it works excellently because brokers work together. Usually one's representing the buyer, one's representing the seller. So we work together, and that's completed through the multiple listing service.
Mortgage banker, an intermediary who originates and services real estate loans on behalf of investors. A mortgage broker, an intermediary who brings real estate lenders and borrowers together and negotiates loan agreements between them.
And we work with both. And I'd much rather work with a mortgage banker or broker, a local mortgage banker or broker, than most of your online outfits. What I've found is if someone's local, can see you eye to eye, is going to have more interest in trying to do the best they can for you. Can't tell you how many times I've had an online lender out of state and they just didn't care. Oh, we need an extension or we need this. They're not used to working with our local title companies, escrow, appraisers, just how the whole process works. And they're shipping documents from all over. So for the most part, the mortgage banker is going to be at the bank and work with their funds. And a lot of times those funds are either portfolio or they may sell those loans on the secondary market, versus a mortgage broker who will have more variety of types of loans that they can ship to. So they may be local, but they may have sources that aren't local. And sometimes those are great for the trickier loans. So everyone's situation is a little bit different as a borrower. Every real estate property you're purchasing has a little bit different situation. So sometimes I think the brokers can get a little bit more creative on obtaining that special financing.
Mortgage. Number one definition, an instrument that creates a voluntary lien on real property to secure repayment of a debt, and which, unlike in a deed of trust, does not include a power of sale, so it can only be foreclosed on judicially. The parties are the mortgagor, the borrower, and the mortgagee, the lender. The term is often used more generally to refer to either a mortgage or a deed of trust.
And I think this is a bit of a misnomer. I definitely agree with that number two definition, that a lot of people call it a mortgage, even when there's a difference between a mortgage and a deed of trust. and you'll go through on these definitions. There's a lot of terms that we'll have that reference mortgage, which I guess almost interact with deed of trust as well. But for the most part in Washington State, we use deeds of trust, and we will use promissory notes, and the foreclosures are non-judicially, so it doesn't take going to court in order for a lender to go through the foreclosure process. So these, I would say, happen a lot less often in residential real estate than deeds of trust. Mutual consent. When all parties freely agree to the terms of a contract without fraud, undue influence, duress, menace, or mistake. Mutual consent is achieved through an offer and acceptance. It's sometimes referred to as a meeting of the minds. The benefit for mutual acceptance is it really summarizes in writing the beliefs of all parties involved, and whether we've gone back and forth and negotiated, but eventually we come to a transaction that is agreeable to everyone. It's signed off in writing, and now we have a living, breathing document that we can move forward to. Also, once we have mutual acceptance, that agreement is then handed to escrow, and I'll consider it an escrow instruction. So escrow, or the title company, third-party closer, those are their written instructions on how they want the parties to proceed. So if it says, buyer and seller want to close on this date, that's an escrow instruction. The price is an escrow instruction. All the terms on there are essentially instructions to escrow as far as what we would like this neutral third party to handle for us. So mutual acceptance that's when we high five each other. If you see on TV, we got mutual acceptance, we have a deal. If you're buying or selling, that's the day we've been looking for.
Yeah, it's the quick process of going from being on the market to being pending, usually as well. So you'll see at mutual acceptance, the property will go from being like active on the multiple listing to pending, which means that there's been mutual acceptance.
Right, good point.
The National Association of Realtors, or the NAR, a trade association of real estate agents. Only members of NAR may call themselves realtors.
Versus realtors, which is it's definitely a mispronounced term quite often. It does get thrown out there in Washington State. Once you become a broker, get your real estate license, you're a real estate broker. We're all brokers if you have that license. But some of the offices will say realtor, and some of the offices won't. And our office at RE/MAX, we are realtors, as all RE/MAX brokers are. And what basically the realtors has a higher code of ethics, a board of standards, and it's just a higher level of doing real estate. So it is something I would consider if you're working with someone. Are they part of the higher echelons of rules and how they have to treat people? And it is that we do have a lot more guidelines to work with as being a realtor.
Natural person, a human being, an individual, as opposed to an artificial person, such as a corporation.
I can't add much to that.
Well, in real estate, you can buy property in multiple different ways, right? So you can buy it as a corporation, or as an LLC, or as an individual.
Sure. They all have their advantages. I think where we'll see people buy as a non-natural person, if you were an LLC, a limited liability corporation, the benefit for that is two. One, on taxes. So I think it's easier to keep all of your taxes for one property. If you have 123 Main Street, you have 123 Main Street LLC, it's all right there in one LLC. Another huge advantage is liability. So let's just say you have 10 properties, someone hurts themselves on Main Street, sues you, and they want to go after all 10 of your properties. So all 10 of your properties, if you hold them personally, are at risk, or if you hold them all under one LLC. So sometimes people may get property-specific LLCs for each property, because if there is an issue with that, the extent of what someone generally can go after is that LLC. Now, we're not attorneys, We don't play them on TV, but a lot of attorneys will try to work around this, but it's the first form of protection for owning real estate and reducing your liability.